Everybody, we have a big day today. Big day. We have Ms. Danielle Marshall. So introduce yourself, please, because she is brilliant and she's going to help us understand things. So I'm excited about today. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your professional development journey and help us get to know you.
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Mary. I'm really
Yeah.
excited to be able to be here with you today. So Danielle Marshall, by way of introduction, I am a racial equity strategist and executive coach. And so when I think about sort of my journey, a lot of the work that I do has gotten started because I came out of the nonprofit sector. And so as I was working in nonprofits for over 20 years, one of the things that I really had an opportunity to do was to be deeply rooted in youth serving organizations, primarily serving Black and Brown communities. And something that really occurred to me, and I would say even in my early 20s, is there was this very persistent narrative about who the children were that we were serving. Um, and it was interesting because the narrative often came from people that were not from the direct communities that we were working in. They did not represent the people that they were talking about. And the challenge with some of these narratives is they were, again, really persistent, but they were negative. They were so focused on what the children would grow up to be, what outcomes they would have in life, um, what they would be able to achieve overall. And again, they were not necessarily positive. And I realized really quickly, even though I didn't have the language as an early 20 professional to understand what completely was happening, what did occur to me, because my background is also as an industrial organizational psychologist, is that this was more about systems than it was ever about the people. The children were wonderful, their families were wonderful, they were all working for really important goals in their own lives. And yet, so much of my work in the early days was around narrative shifting. So fast forward to today, and I'm focusing again on racial equity, and I'm realizing part of this is about dismantling systems that lead to the outcomes, not necessarily placing it back on people. And so the coaching in my world, I know that's something that you're really interested in. It sort of weaves in because it is not just a system shift that's needed. Individual mindsets are also needed to be shifted in this process, because we often talk about organizations as if they are the toxic thing, right? I don't want to work here. The management is toxic. The situation is toxic. The culture is toxic. But we forget oftentimes that we're part of the larger system. And so in doing the work to address both systems, but also mindsets and attitudes and beliefs, that's where I see a lot of success in my work.
Love it. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot to think about. And, I feel so I come from the medical background and I feel like just recently started talking about culture, like the importance of culture. And now I'm learning like mini cultures, that's where we are part of it, and then larger cultures, and that everything we can influence the variety of cultures. But I hear the same messaging in healthcare is like it's the system's broken. And I think like, geez, I'm in the system. So that's interesting that, you saw this from the beginning, that there's certain narratives and messaging. And, I guess we could fast forward to today as, you have worn many hats. So you've worked in organizations, now you work, am I correct in saying more with executive coaching, one-on-one business coaching? Is that
I do, well, my
you do
coaching
many things,
actually
I
does,
think. Yeah.
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 Well, the business coaching is more new to the repertoire.
Got
I've
you.
been coaching for several years on an
Okay.
executive level, but I'm beginning to blend the two of these things together. And I'll
Gotcha.
just explain a little bit about that. So
Please.
the initial coaching I was doing in terms of executive coaching was really focused on cultural competencies. So if you're working
Okay.
within an organization, what does it mean to really be able to relate across cultural differences to the individuals on your team, to the vendors, to your larger stakeholder groups, clients, et cetera? A lot of times we come, and all of us, right? I know there's been some funniness about the language of unconscious bias and bias in general, but we all as human beings have bias. That is just a natural part of our makeup. But what gets a little bit more difficult is when it is on an unconscious level and you don't see that you're carrying these biases. And so a
Mhm.
lot of my coaching around cultural competencies is to help people develop strategies to navigate when they come across someone who is different from them, from a different cultural background, whether that happen to be ethnicity, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, you name it. We really need to dive into what beliefs we hold and where those beliefs even stemmed from. And then I've now pivoted a little bit to supporting business owners, particularly small businesses, in terms of coaching on that front. I'm a Hello Seven coach. And so I'm really excited about being able to add that to my credentials. But one of the things that I found to be really important as I marry sort of my DEI and culture background to now business coaching is helping people to develop businesses based on, and I focus on historically marginalized identities. So people that are BIPOC, people that are LGBTQ plus, et cetera. I'm helping them to build businesses based on their cultural values and norms, not in spite of them. And that's really important because so many of us have been asked over the years to assimilate more to dominant culture. And this is an opportunity for people to really say, I value this piece of my identity. I want to bring this into my business. I want to simply be who I am. I want to be authentic. And I believe that we truly can thrive when we utilize the things that are natural to us. So that's a little
Beautiful.
bit about how I got started on business coaching.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So yeah, so I sometimes I think of culture. I'm a gardener and I love nature. So sometimes I think of culture as like a lily pad, like floating in a pond, and like everything that's in that pond, like things decaying, things growing, nutrients. How do you explain culture to someone who's new to it? Like how do you define that?
Yeah. So when I think about culture on a very basic level, it is the patterns, the norms, the behaviors that are
Mm,
associated with a given group. So these are
gotcha.
not necessarily stereotypes because people like to lean on stereotypes. Those are not helpful, right? Those are negative ways that we view a given community. But
Mm-hmm.
there are, so while I don't want people to stereotype, I do want folks to be able to recognize patterns that exist within a culture. So in your
Okay.
culture, you might be an indirect communicator. You might be someone like in my culture, we talk with our hands a lot. So you might see that during the course of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that are just true for us culturally. Again, not a stereotype, just patterns that exist. How we raise our families, how we think about money, how we get married or not get married, right? All of these things are true within cultural groups. And so when I also extend back again to think about like what groups might exist, at any given time, we belong to multiple cultures because we have intersectionalities in our identities. So, I am both a Black person who also happens to be a woman. I am also Christian, right? These are all cultural groups that I belong to. And so I
Mm-hmm.
ask people to think about culture both in terms of the membership, but then also what it means to be a member of several identities at one time.
Interesting. So let's go to the woman that you are coaching. Let's say she is thinking about a business and she wants to honor her culture, the norms in her culture, her I guess, values. And can you walk us through like how you can support her or your coaching style or what a coach is and how they help somebody who's trying to do that but is not sure where to start?
Right. Well, the first thing that I would say, because I think this is important, a distinction, because I do wear two hats. I am coach
Hmm.
and I am consultant, depending on who I'm working with. As
Gotcha.
a coach, my goal is to support your goal. And so I want to have that laid out first and foremost with
Hmm.
people to figure out what is important to you in this moment. So, in the scenario that you gave, if we're working on building a business and that's your goal in this moment, I want to know more about that business. I want to know more about your values and your culture. So let's take some time to like really talk about that. Like, what are the elements of your culture that are particularly important to you? What are the elements of your culture that maybe you don't ascribe to as much? Because even though we are members of a culture, not every norm and value within that cultural group serves us. And so once we have all of that laid out for us, we can
Hmm.
now think about how you want to weave that in. And for people, that can be anything from I want to include it in my branding elements. Perhaps I'm making products or offering services to my specific cultural group. To take a step back, it might be how you message, right? Like what your social media presence looks like. There's so many different ways it can be infused in, but the idea is to really get people to identify those values, talk a little bit more about what's important to them, and then start to figure out ways to infuse that into the business.
Neat, neat. Yes. So I think that could be very new for someone, right? Because I'm thinking like me in medicine and healthcare, it was very male dominated when I entered, and still remains so in the leadership. And so I feel like I'm always conforming, to that. So if a person is newly starting their business, does that take a while for them to be able to just honor those feelings, like you can build something that's important to you and you can have that
Yeah.
in your business. Is that like a huge mind shift for them?
For some people, absolutely. I would say 100% to that.
Yeah.
Typically, the folks that I am working with, however, have come
Hmm.
to the conclusion that they're ready for this journey.
Gotcha.
Um, I often tell people that convincing you is not my ministry.
Right.
I am here to walk alongside of people who want to be on this journey, who have already said that this is important to them to really be able to be authentic in this moment. But one of the things, even to the point that you just mentioned around being a woman in the medical field, sometimes we're not even aware at first what we've accepted as a norm or value for us versus
Hmm.
what has been imposed on us. And I think there's some dissecting that needs to happen again to be able to say, like, is this actually my value, or did this come, where did it come from? Right? Is this something that was
Hmm.
imposed by my family, by the larger society, that I was just told one day, right? Because it's part of that narrative.
Hmm.
And is it something that I adopt? So even if it came from your family of origin, sometimes as we grow up, we have an opportunity to pause for a second and say, does this thing that I was taught, at 5, 6 years old, does it still serve me and the person that I'm hoping to become?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I think that the day comes and we do question, and hopefully we always, each day just question what is important to us today. Who are we? I think, that is something that is a healthy mindset, just to make sure, like, am I in agreement with the values here? And of course, most institutions will share the values of the institution, and we need to merge with those values to work there as an employee. But it's kind of a neat situation. If you're building something, you get to build your own thing and add your own values. That's really neat. And I could imagine that with, I know personally that took me a while to figure out what was important to me when I was building my Brain Fresh, and I had the ability to put that in because it's mine, so I'm molding it and building it, which is really neat. Go
And
ahead.
I would also add, even for people that are within company structures,
Mm-hmm.
yes, there is a culture that exists there, but
Mm-hmm.
culture isn't static. Culture changes and it shifts, and frequently at that. And so there's an opportunity for you to be part of that culture, whether it is that you have chosen that you're going to assimilate sort of into that culture, or that you're going to help expand on that culture. And I think that's really important for people because it doesn't have to stay exactly as it is when we walk through the door. And so, what are the things that we're willing to do to be part of this larger team? And then, what are the pieces that we feel like we have to maintain for ourselves? Perhaps it's the way you talk, or the way that you dress, or how you even think about solving problems. Those are true for you. That is part of your own cultural background. And we want to give people an opportunity to really bring forth themselves in their work.
Love it. You love it. So you mentioned you're a new certified Hello 7 business coach. So who would you like to reach out to if they're interested in learning more about you and your services? And you're also a consultant. But let's just speak about coaching, because one of my goals of my channel is to share what is a coach, all the different kind of faces and philosophies of various coaches, and the styles of coaches, and the goals of various coaches. So as I learn about coaching, there's so many different, goals of the coach and background. So tell us who should reach out to you, how do they find you?
Sure. So the people that I am most interested in serving are folks, again, that have decided that they want to weave their cultural norms and values into their business. These are high potential earners. They're people that are already at the at least $100,000 mark, looking to grow their business to 1 million plus.
Love it.
And they are representing identities that have been historically marginalized. So Black, Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ plus community members, et cetera. This is the group that I really want to be able to infuse sort of my DEI background into supporting them in growing their business. And I'll tell you why this is particularly important to me is
Okay.
that for us to be able to make the changes in the world that we're seeking so that we have more equitable outcomes for everyone, we need to have access to capital. So whether that means that you are interested in making a donation to someone's campaign that represents your belief system, if it is that you want to be able to afford to send your kids to college debt free, all the different things, right? Even to make sure that you're investing in your own professional development. We are in a capitalist society, right? And I don't necessarily view money as a bad thing. Money is a tool. and you get to decide based on your culture and your values how you want to use the money. But it's really hard to make those choices when you don't have access. And what I'm trying to do is level the playing field for people who want to have access to capital so that they can make the moves they need to in life.
Love it. Love it. How should people find you? What's the process?
Sure, you can
Yeah.
find me on my website is probably the easiest way. So
Okay.
that's www.culture-principles.com.
Okay.
People can also find me as Danielle Marshall on LinkedIn or at Culture Principles, one word, on Instagram.
Okay. We'll put all that in the show notes. Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, thank you for all that you do and changing, the face of our current reality. I mean, the reason I kind of get up and go during the day is I'm not okay with the status quo and I want to see things change. And I agree with you that, people need the tools. One of those tools, of course, happens unfortunately in or it's just a reality, right? It's a capitalist society, and that is a tool to help get people to have more power and
Absolutely.
say in their day and in the future. And I think that's where we can have an impact. And me, I love neuroscience. And so I always think like when people are fully engaged and motivated and living truly in their values, they use all their gifts, as far as neuroscience wise, like they come up with the big ideas, they're more
Yeah.
motivated, they're more creative. And then I think the world can really flourish at a higher level. So that's always my motivation is to let people know, how truly to use their gifts neuroscience wise. And I think, folks like you are just making a difference. So thank you for all you do. Any parting words for those that are thinking about maybe getting a coach?
A coach is probably one of the best investments that you can make. Even as a coach, I have a coach.
Mhm.
And it is because there is an opportunity to really have that one on one time where you are expressing what you need in this moment, what your goal, your dreams, your visions are. And you have someone who's going to serve as an accountability partner, helping you get there. And really digging into sort of the mindset issues that we all carry, and just taking you to the next level. So I could not recommend more getting a coach.
I love that. Very well said. Okay, everybody. Well, I will have all the links for Danielle Marshall in the show notes. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me
We're,
on, Mary. It
we
was
are
great.
honored. We are honored. Let's stop recording.